Honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. We give God thanks for these holy scriptures.
Good morning. Good to see you. You know, we always say good morning and welcome. I'm always curious that every time I stand up here, I realize there are a lot of people here that almost didn't make it. You probably got out of bed this morning thinking, I'm not sure if I really want to go to church. And then some of you pulled into the parking lot, and by the time you got to the parking lot, I wasn't sure if I really want to go in or not. And you made it here, and what I pray is that whatever you're looking for, you'll find it in whatever form that it comes, whether it's the prayers that we offer, the fellowship that we have, the word of Scripture we read, prayers we proclaim, whatever it may be. I just hope you'll do it. I'm always intrigued by the people that almost didn't come. Those, I think, are set up where God really does speak to us in ways that benefit us. So today, we're going to be continuing our series on the letters we need to write. And this whole series, I hope, has been personal. This is not an abstract God, the universe, and other related kind of topics. It's really personal. It's about our parents, and what Sharon just read to you comes straight to us from the 10 Commandments, but I want to make it personal because as we invite you to participate and be a part of it, I just want you to think for just a moment about your own parents, people who brought you into this world, people who taught you, nurtured you, loved you, who stayed with you, who were so diligent in what they did. I think it's the most formative part of the early stage of our life. Nobody has more influence than our parents and where we came from. So much of them still lives and breathes within each one of us for all the things that we've gathered from them that they provided for us in the foundational parts of our life. I want you to just think about your parents in particular. And whatever that memory is, think about the best thing that you could possibly remember, maybe the most important parts of your life when they were there for you, maybe conversations you had, maybe trips you took, whatever it might be. I just want to make this personal. I want to put it in context as we begin to look at what does it mean to honor your mother and your father. Will you pray with me? God, let the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. It's been said that parenting is the hardest job in the world. Most of the people who say that are parents. And if you're a parent, you know exactly what that means. It's an incredibly hard job. Just think about it. You're responsible for a human being that comes into this world who's totally dependent on you. They cannot do anything themselves. They look to you for everything, even the most basic necessities, feeding, eating, all those kinds of things. And you realize that you're responsible. It's the most enormous responsibility you'll ever have in your entire life. And there's no training, no manual, there's no license. You realize if you want to practice law, you got to get a license. You want to practice medicine, you got to get a license. You want to drive a car, you got to get a license. If you want to be a plumber or an electrician, you have to get a license. To be a parent, no requirement at all. They don't give you a manual. They don't tell you exactly how to do it. There's no report card. There's no annual review to see how you're progressing and how you're meeting all your goals. You just do it the best you can, and you know how hard it is. It's exhausting, incredibly exhausting. It's also really, really expensive. You haven't figured this out, and I got bad news for you. Been a couple of studies done. One that said between the ages of 1 and 17, it costs about $310,000 to raise a child. Yeah, that's before college, before weddings, before everything else. Time magazine actually had a better report. If you want to take a child and raise them all the way through college, it'll cost you about $1.1 million. You know, we're always told the biggest investment we'll ever make, the biggest purchase we'll ever have in our life is a house. You could buy 5 houses for that. And guess what? Kids aren't going to increase in value to the degree that a house might. You're also not going to be able to sell them. And at 16, they're going to tell you they hate you. So really, it's a win-win situation for you. Parenting is the hardest job in the world. But you and I know and agree it's the most rewarding, sacred act you and I will ever do in our life. And our relationship is so important with our parents, it's actually embedded in the 10 Commandments. The 5th commandment that Sharon just read, honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God has given you. There are 10 commandments. If you ever looked at the Ten Commandments, you realize the first four are vertical, up to God, praising God, no other gods before me. You get to the fifth, it's a transition, so everything before that is vertical, everything after that's horizontal, meaning how do we deal with the people in our lives? And it begins with honor your mother and father. So as you begin with the commandments to look to God, and then you begin to look at the horizontal ones that tells you how you deal with other people, formed a stage of how we deal with our neighbors and how do we seek justice and how do we reconcile when things go wrong. All those things are born out of this transitional fifth commandment that's so incredibly important. How do you get from God to your neighbor? It goes through your parents, of what they've taught you and how they have led you in your life. We've been talking about the letter we need to write. And I understand in 2023 it seems almost out of touch. Nobody writes letters anymore. We do all emails and texts and all kinds of things. But there's this ancient sacred art of writing a letter that is still, I think, more important today than it's ever been, and how we do it, because we understand the power of words. It's what we talk about every single week, about the words that we use to build up or tear down, the words that edify or eviscerate, the words that are actually going to hurt you or the words that are going to heal you. There are words that are going to lift your spirits. There's also words that could kill your spirit. There's a power in the words that we use. And I say this just to reiterate it every single time. When you come across the passage in Corinthians when Paul says we ourselves are letters of Christ to other people, boy, if we took that seriously, if we stopped and think, what did I just say to this person? It would represent Christ's love for them and for me. Is there anything I've done with my life during this day or said that's beyond just my own selfish, self-centered kind of world? Do I actually, they're reading me looking for the presence of Christ. And what are they reading? What are they saying? What's the statement that we're making? Words are important. The things that we say, the things that we withhold saying, I think are incredibly important. In fact, I've said this over and over again, but I think there's two things that just sort of happen to all of us, particularly at a certain age. You sort of deal with this pain of unfinished business and unresolved pain. I mean, just some loose ends that happen in the course of our lives and things that we say or don't say and conflicts that never get resolved and words that were never spoken, all those kinds of things that sort of build up as you get older. And when I talk to people, a lot of them talk about their regrets, particular latter stage of their life. They look back over the course of their life and they think about all the things they should have done or should have said. And in the moment that it was happening, they didn't really comprehend how incredibly important it was. They didn't realize that at some point in life, doors began to close. And you wake up sometimes too late because you want to go back and undo it, but the door is closed sooner than we want them to. So I think about our parents and this impossible task that they had. And I got to be careful because some of you in this room have the best parents in the entire world. I mean, you just put them on a pedestal because they were amazing. And I promise you, there are some people who had a difficult relationship with their parents, maybe still do. And then the vast majority of us had really good parents who were obviously imperfect people. And I think it bothers me sometimes that religion has now taken on this reputation, particularly from unchurched people, about guilt and shame, and everything sort of feels like, well, you're not good enough, you don't do enough, and therefore you're not enough, and over again. And part of this unresolved pain is this regret, this feeling of shame and guilt that you didn't do what you were supposed to do. And it always bothers me. And part of this whole process is to invite us to a place of, let's not get to the point in our lives where we regret that we didn't take advantage of it, that we actually did some things early on in our life before a door closed or before we had the opportunity to move forward. So I know that some of you, to write a letter to your parents, whether they're even here on earth or not, it's probably a difficult task. Maybe it brings up some painful moments. Maybe for some of you, the parents are no longer with us. And so how do you actually write a letter to that? Well, it's as much for them as to you. And I believe in the power of words, so much so that I think the words we hear here on earth are lifted all the way to heaven for those that are not with us that can hear them. And if you've never written this letter, never thought you would want to, I don't want you to feel the guilty or shame. Because there's no shame in waiting late in life to do that. Maybe that's the only way you do. Finally, you get to have a point where you're mature enough, you've grown enough to actually put it into words, the real truth of what you want to say. So you look at the fifth commandment, the 10 commandments that are listed. It is the fifth commandment to honor your mother and father. Honor is a deeply held word all the way from the Old Testament and the New Testament. It comes from the Hebrew word koved or kovad. which means weight, which means you give weight to something that you sense has authority or power. It's something that's deserving of your respect. Kavod is that Hebrew word that says, this is something that I put great weight of dignity and respect and honor them. That you look at certain people and you say they've learned some things along the way that I don't yet know. They've gained wisdom through what they've done and what they've said. They've learned in some cases, the hard way. We look at what that means. And Jesus spoke about honoring your mother and father. And he tells these stories, but he also lives it out. Most formative people in his early life was mother and father. His mother is there every single moment of his life, even at the cross when everybody else has abandoned him. It's his mother who stays with him as a mother would, and a mother's love. When he talks about the prodigal son, he's describing a father who runs out on the road to greet and welcome home a child who's made an absolute mess out of their life. He knows and understands the importance of honoring mother and father and the importance of what they've done, and giving weight to who they are. There are values and lessons you and I still hold to this very day, things that they taught us that just sort of resonate in your head. And sometimes we just sort of go through a phase in life where we think, I don't want to be anything like my parents. And then we enter that other phase, and some of you there, where you actually become exactly like your parents. You start saying the same things over and over again. You look in the reflection of a store mirror, and you swear you're looking at your father or your mother because so much of them is in you, so much of you is in them. And then you begin to repeat the phrases you always heard as a kid. Well, nothing is free. You have to work hard to get whatever you want in life. How about this one? Life is unfair. Well, get over it. It's unfair. If a job's worth doing, it's worth doing well. Do the right thing, not the easy thing. You can just hear them in your voice. Always stand up for what you believe in, even if it means you're standing alone. When you know better, do better. Can't please everyone, so stop trying. Clean up your mess. Leave everything better than you found it. You learn those things as kids, and you realize how applicable they are to you as an adult. Doing the right thing, working hard. Nothing is free. Life is not fair. Accepting what you can. Doing something about things that you cannot accept. Of course, they also told us some things that really weren't true. So when they were about to punish you, I don't know about you, but my parents used to say, this is going to hurt me more than it hurts you. And I'm thinking, no, it's not. It's going to hurt me a lot. Or how about don't swallow gum? It stays in your stomach for 7 years. How was anybody going to know that? As a kid, pretty effective because you didn't swallow your gum. Or eat your food. There are kids in China who are starving. I never figured that one out. How is me not eating broccoli going to help some child in China who needs food? One day my brothers and I stumbled upon, we're playing hide and go seek, and we stumbled upon a bottle of scotch in my father's closet. We asked him about it, and he told us it was for snake bites, and we believed him. Never knew there were that many snakes around our house. Honor your father and mother. It means seek their wisdom. How do you do that? Give them weight, give them dignity, appreciate them, care for them in their old age. Some of you are doing that, and you're going to tell me it's the hardest thing in the world, but you feel like it's a privilege, it's an honor, because they cared for you. They loved you when you couldn't care for yourself. How could you not, at the end of their life, care for them in a way that brings dignity to them? You honor them by forgiving them for all their shortcomings, their imperfections, because every person is imperfect. If you're a parent, you're going to make mistakes, and every parent realizes and lives with that. They know we're flawed. We all do. And you give thanks for all they've done. Be grateful for the sacrifices they make. Mark Twain said, when I was a boy of 14, my father was so ignorant he could hardly stand to have the old man around. When I got to be 21, I was astonished at how much he had learned in 7 short years. It's the idea that our parents change as we change. If you're fortunate to have your parents long enough, and if you're in their life long enough, and if you've grown enough and are mature enough, the great surprise, I think, if you're blessed, comes at the end when you begin to realize that your parents are actually very real people. They're not just your mom and dad. They actually have a life of their own. They actually were a child. They grew up. They had aspirations. They were teenagers. They were the wild 20s. They were people. They were real. You never saw them as anything but your own parents. But they're real people who lived, who laughed, who hurt, who cried, who struggled. I have a good friend of mine. So when he went off to college and he came home after his freshman year and he looked at his dad and he started complaining about how hard it was. And he started telling his father, well, you wouldn't understand because you have no idea how hard this thing is and what difficult transition is. And I'm trying my hardest, but it is incredibly hard. And His father sat and listened for a while, and he looked at him and said, "Son, when I was your age," because he fought in World War II, "I had people who were trying to kill me," which shuts down the conversation pretty easily. And since a few years ago, before my father passed away, he had this notion he wanted to take a road trip. And he was 90 years old at the time. We took a road trip back to where he grew up. And I will tell you, I look back on that, and it was the most incredible experience because I had 2 weeks solid, just my dad and him. And we drove all over West Texas, back to where he grew up. Grew up on the 4-6 ranch. His own father had to drop out of school when he was in the 6th grade because his father had died and he was the oldest and had to start providing for the family. He grew up with almost nothing. He grew up in such a small little town that only had 2 people who actually graduated from his high school, and he used to tell us he was a salutatorian, which took us a while to figure out. He came in second in a 2-man race. But he also had 3 children and a wife, and suddenly decided he was going to change careers. He also quit a job because they asked him to do something that was unethical, and he didn't want to do it, and he refused, and he resigned. And I spent hours with him. I saw where he grew up, talked to friends. He knew somebody in almost every little town we went to. And I got to see my dad as a real person, more than just my own father. So here's the real truth. Here's what you've already discovered. If you haven't, you already will. It means you're never going to get it. You won't get parenting. You won't get your own parents until the day you become a parent yourself. So here's what we really want to say to our parents now that we became parents in our life. What we want to say to is, hey, I'm really sorry about the lack of sleep. Because it wasn't just the midnight feedings when we were young. It's literally staying up when we were teenagers waiting for the last one to come home. Sleepless nights. You want to say, thank you for saying no to me. I'm glad I didn't get everything I wanted, because it taught me an invaluable lesson. Thank you for also reading to me every night, which piqued my imagination. Thank you for telling me what you believe, for showing me, for taking me to church, for understanding why it's so important to have a faith in a living God who is Jesus in my life. And you're the ones who showed it to me. And you're the ones who opened the door for me. And I'll never forget it. Thank you also for just answering a million questions that began with the word why. Do you remember as a parent, you're just inundated with the why questions. Why is this? Why is the sky blue? Why is that? You know what you first realize is how little you know about this world. That was before the internet. Some of you at least can now look it up and actually know that you're talking about something. But every question about why, this insatiable thirst for knowledge as a child. We should also just apologize for the worries that we caused them. We didn't realize the things that we were doing. The feeling of us being out and away and they're not sure where we are or if we're safe or worrying about us until we get back home again. Thanks for showing me the world, for opening up a whole new vision of what life could be. Thank you for saying things like, I love you. Thank you for always just letting me come home whenever I need a home, no matter what age I ever was. So how do you actually write a letter to your parents? Because this is not only practical, it's personal. So how do you actually do it? And we're not just talking in this sort of terms of abstract, what it might be. What if you sat down, how would you actually write a letter to your parents? What would you say to them? What would you want them to know? Whether your parents are in heaven or they're still with you and you're still in the midst of the struggle, there is something you need to write, and I trust there is something they need to hear. So I just want you to imagine for a moment. Imagine you're a parent, and you wonder if you were a good mother or a good father, because God knows you've made some mistakes. God knows you look back over being a parent and you realize there were so many things you didn't know until after the fact. There's so many things when you look back you might have done differently. You hoped you did your best, but you sort of look back and you're not really sure. You hope and pray, and to your absolute amazement, your kids have turned out well. And then one day a letter arrives in the mail. And you take it and you look at the envelope and you recognize immediately who it's from. It's from your son or your daughter. You open it up and you begin to read. And you're reading words that every single parent longs to hear. It simply says this: Dear Mom and Dad, thank you. I'm happy. I know you love me. I need you. You read the last one and it makes you smile. And you were right. The 5th commandment, honor your father and mother. is the only one of the 10 that comes with a promise. And if you take the time to write a letter to your parents, I promise you, you will not regret it.